And so it's natural that any asset of this size and liquidity has an ETF. I mean, there are triple short NASDAQ ETFs. There's like an ETF for anything you can think of, including really bad ideas, because people either trade them or hold them. And so it's natural that Bitcoin would be an ETF. And it's integrated into the system. And of course, it's good to tell people, like, if you can help it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Everyday Finance. In this video, Lyn Alden discuss about Bitcoin. According to Lyn Alden, it gradually legitimizes it to some extent and may even boost liquidity and slightly lessen volatility, rebalancing effect most likely at scale. Hence, it makes sense that any asset of theirs is an ETF for everything really. There are triple short NASDAQ ETFs, for example. Because of its scale and liquidity, you may consider adding extremely terrible ideas because it's normal for people to hold or trade them. That Bitcoin would be an ETF, and that it is just integrated into the system, which is obviously beneficial to inform people that you are trapped into a brokerage or a RAA or something such. If at all possible, attempt to hang on to the real thing that, this is a helpful vehicle, but you know that you want price exposure for your IRA. It's more like it provides you with some legal protection. And one thing the lawsuit revealed was that one is correct. The government is not a single entity. If you take a glance at the SEC, for instance, you can already see that Gary and Pierce, and the vote on whether to accept it was just about 3-2, and lots of things Lyn Alden discuss, so please watch the video to end. And share this video, and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance. Thanks.
Well, he was a decided vote.
Yeah, he went and approved, yeah. But there were two more against it. But it shows there's rule of law in the U.S. to a reasonable degree, not a perfect degree. Mm-hmm. I would argue, as we've seen with Assange, for example, that's kind of an area where it's not working out yet. But for the most part, we have rule of law, or at least there's very strong avenues to at least try to enforce rule of law. And if you're well capitalized and you're on just the right side of how the law is written and truth and all that, you have a pretty good shot. We saw that back in the 1990s crypto wars. Mm-hmm. Back then, crypto didn't mean cryptocurrency, it meant cryptography. So when they were challenging the right to be able to create open source cryptographic code and then just share it around the world, the US government challenged that. But by putting it in books and by, relying on constitutional law, they basically, David beat Goliath. And this was like a case of not that consequential, something like that, because that kind of set the foundation for the internet and e-commerce. But this was like a little watershed moment of, 10 years of holding back the ETF and just kind of proving that, no, your arguments are arbitrary and capricious.
Yep.
They're not based on reasonable things. And so the SEC lost. And there's other things they could lose in the future. Or the Treasury could lose in court. I think probably some of those challenges are ahead in the next decade. They and a lot of their investors, I don't think they have a gold ETF either. I mean, right. I think they allow them on their platform, but they don't offer one, even though they offer an ETF for almost everything. So they kind of have, they're not really they don't really like hard money. They like stocks, bonds, and cash, basically. It's very kind of traditional thinking.
Right.
It's funny because they're named Vanguard. They disrupted an industry at their time. They put a spike through the kind of the policy of really high fees for managing equities and not really outperforming. They did all that, but then the problem is they kind of became the market. We see that a lot recently. For example, Apple was disruptive, and they have the whole kind of famous 1984 commercial. And now they're kind of like trying to maintain monopoly control over their app store and kind of say like, no, you can't do that kind of, say like Zap, Tipping, and Nostr in our ecosystem. So they're kind of like anti-innovation now in a way, because they're the incumbents. And we see kind of Vanguard has done the same thing. They became the market. Passive indexing is like everywhere now. And, they're one of the largest asset managers in the world. And they're just like, no, we don't want to change anything. And they literally allow triple leverage short NASDAQ ETFs. They allow like crazy decaying like volatility ETFs that you're really only supposed to hold for like days if you're trying to hedge something.
Yeah.
All sorts of crazy things. But like, no, Bitcoin's the one thing that's too volatile and too dangerous for our clients.
According to Lyn Alden, the larger hub was inspired by the smaller hub, which is why it's so powerful. In the next 5 years, we might see some of these other tiny hubs encourage their larger hub in the area to be a more welcoming environment for Bitcoin because they can see its potential for economic benefit. The communities that are using it, and the vibrant community that surrounds it that are prepared to support it and vote for it, which is strong. And Lyn believed that the emergence of Bitcoin hubs is the most positive development. While considering ways to improve Bitcoin, you know exactly how we can do it 5 years prior, 5 years from now on, as opposed to right now. What has improved since 5 years ago, and how is one example. Naturally, promoting any kind of self-custody option that is feasible is possible. For example, Lyn Alden have been advising people to use tap signers and nunchucks. Let's back to the Lyn Alden interview.
Basically everyone's talking about the ETF this week. I really like the rise of little Bitcoin hubs. Bitcoin Beach showed the power of it because you had a small town become very Bitcoinized, and that inspired a nation, or at the very least it inspired the president of a nation, not the whole nation. But it inspired, it basically spread to some extent. And now we're seeing kind of the second phase of that is multiple of these around the world. And that's important. Like, if someone, you want to build any country, I would love it if anyone emails me and says, I'm in country XYZ, how do I buy Bitcoin? I don't want to say, oh, go to Binance or go to, major. I want to be able to say, okay, go to here's the website for your local hub.
Go there.
Go ask them. They'll tell you all the best local options, and get on their wallet. Because also another thing about custody is you don't want everybody in the world. Like right now, Binance holds a lot of Bitcoin, for example, and you don't want millions of people across the world all holding Bitcoin in one giant shared honeypot.
Nope.
Ideally, you want to, if you're self-custody if it's economically possible. If it's not, at the very least, you want to distribute that custody. You want, for example, Bitcoin in El Salvador to be held in El Salvador.
Yes.
You don't want them to be outsourcing all their custody. You want Bitcoin in South Africa to be held ideally in South Africa, both at the individual level, and even if you're thinking about this from a nation level, you should be accepting of Bitcoin so that at least your citizens, when they're holding Bitcoin or stable coins or whatever, that they're as much as possible not trusting foreign entities.
Well, I guess it's also its own hub and spoke model in that I think you can consider. I think you can consider El Salvador itself as a hub, but it's got like micro hubs in it, like El Zonte as a little hub.
And little hubs can inspire bigger hubs. That's kind of what we saw. That little hub, El Zonte, inspired the bigger hub. Yeah, and that's powerful. And so we could see in the next 5 years some of these other little hubs inspire their bigger hub in their region to be a more accepting place for Bitcoin because they see that there's economic uses there. There's towns that are making use of this. There's a very energized base around it that are willing to vote for it, that are willing to defend it. And that's powerful. And so for me, the rise of Bitcoin hubs is the most bullish thing. And we've over the past decades, there's been less and less like kind of local culture in many places. Basically, people don't feel part of their region anymore. They move around for jobs more often. They work from home as everything's virtual. Whatever reason might be, people are less connected to like their neighbors than they used to be. And if anything, this is like the pendulum swung very far in that direction. And some of these hubs and things like that can actually pull the pendulum back a little bit. You see like a local coalescing, like order coming out of the chaos, as people saying they want that. So they want that physical meetup. They want shared resources, shared working space, or place to gather, place to run, a wallet or things like that. And going back to your initial question of basically, scaling and self-sovereignty, trust is one variable among many that people can do for scaling. It's not the only variable, and it's more available to some people than others. But it's one of the design spaces or one of the design variables you have to work with. And so I think that when we think about making Bitcoin better, how can we make Bitcoin better 5 years from now than it is now? How is it better now than it was 5 years ago? One is obviously advancing any sort of self-custody option where possible. Like I've been recommending nunchuck and tap signer.
Almost everyone this week has been discussing the ETF. It's great that local Bitcoin hubs are growing. Bitcoin Beach, for example, demonstrated the potential of this phenomenon by turning a tiny village into very Bitcoined, which motivated an entire country, or at the very least, the president of a nation, rather than the entire nation. But it also served as inspiration, and to some extent, spread. We are currently witnessing something akin to the second phase of that, which is several of them all over the world, and that is significant. Lyn Alden said, "If someone sent me an email stating that they were in a country, if you wanted to construct any kind of nation, how I purchase Bitcoin XYZ, I want to be able to say, okay, go to the major, rather than, oh, go to Binance." Here is the link to your neighborhood hub. Visit it, inquire, and they will provide you with all of the greatest local options, their wallet as, among other custodial concerns. You don't want everyone in the globe to have access to it. For instance, Binance does not currently hold a large amount of Bitcoin. If you learned something from this video, then please like this video and subscribe our channel Everyday Finance, and we will meet in next video. Thanks.